So, it's my turn to address the group. I would like to thank you very much for this opportunity. We're starting 10 minutes later than we had budgeted, and I have this wonderful 25-minute presentation. So I'll do my best to get it done in the 15 minutes. It might go a little bit over that, so please bear with me. I wanted to start by saying a little bit about the role of treasurer, because when I was first approached to be treasurer of the organization, I was very honored, of course, to let my name stand, and then even more honored when the trustees from ICMCI elected me to be your treasurer. I think it's important just to let you know a little bit about where I'm coming from in this presentation, because as your treasurer, I've now been in the role for 1 year, so that was a very steep learning curve for me, because I didn't come up through the normal CMC. I, in fact, was recruited as a volunteer through Breakthrough Strategy. So that was my introduction to ICMCI. And as a result of that, I'm driven by some quite deeply held beliefs about the profession of management consulting and where we should be going with management consulting. So you will hear a couple of opinions of mine during this presentation today. The great thing about this organization, though, is that I do feel, as Dr. Sung said this morning, that this is a family. I can make my statements clearly, and that as trustees, we together in this room will decide the best way forward, and we will arrive at the right decision. So I thought it was important, though, to give some positioning in terms of the way that we're going to do it. So the starting point is that financing, which is my role, follows budgeting. And what we haven't been very good at, from my experience or my observations until now, is understanding that budgeting follows strategy. So it's really important that as an organization, once we have our strategy in place, that we then start thinking about what are the volunteer hours that we're going to need to be able to implement that strategy, and what is the resourcing that we're going to need to be able to implement that strategy, and resourcing in terms of the actual dollars that we're going to need to be able to do the work. The approach that we have in place now in terms of the basic fees and the members is a decision that we are really driven in terms of our resourcing by this formula. And the formula is, what is our basic fee? You see the numbers up there. And what are the CMCs per CMC? So this model assumes that we are going to be increasing in size in terms of the number of IMCs, and it assumes that we're going to be increasing in the number of members and number of CMCs that we have. Otherwise, the budget for your ICMCI central coordinating body, if you will, doesn't change over time. So if you look at the history of what we've had, I pushed the wrong button. Don't you hate when that happens? So if you look at our history over time, and just pull the curtain back here, what happens is our revenue has been static. So over time, we have been increasing somewhat in the number of IMCs. We have been increasing somewhat in the number of CMCs, but it's been going up and down. And we have been going up and down as well in terms of the amount of variable revenue that we have, which comes in from projects. I've purposely left Breakthrough Strategy aside from this, because the decision was made by all of us that Breakthrough Strategy funds are not used for operations, they're used for investment in the future. So if you look at that, it becomes pretty clear that we're not changing in terms of the resourcing to ICMCI from the consolidation of the IMCs. Yet we have in front of us a strategy which is pretty aggressive in terms of talking about how we want to change our positioning with regard to our profession globally going forward. So as your treasurer, I did put forward a budget which was approved, as Tim said earlier today, and Brian also referred to it in February of this year, to figure out how are we going to fund some of those things that we need to do in order to be able to implement our strategy. And if you add that, you will see that we're forecasting that our member fees will stay about the same, so that's quite traditional. But we are assuming that we are going to be able to raise a significant amount of flexible revenue over the next year. And in my budget report, you see where we're talking about raising that revenue from. I think if you had a more traditional treasurer, someone with a CA, for instance, you wouldn't see a budget like this, because this is a pretty risky budget. It's saying that we are going to fly in the face of several years of tradition, and we as an organization are going to be able to, within 1 year, create that amount of flexible revenue so we can do things like keep an executive director position in place and invest in the future so that we can implement some of those things that we're talking about in the strategy. So that number on the right-hand side does put us as an organization at risk, and it does mean that we as trustees of this organization need to be very aware of the steps that we're taking as we're moving forward. So the question before us then, if you agree with my premise that budgeting follows strategy, is this big question about who are we and what do we want to be. We have a saying in Canada that probably in other English-speaking countries as well, but if it walks like a duck, and if it quacks like a duck, and if it looks like a duck, it's probably a duck. So in my experience with 20 years, actually 25 years working with the International Red Cross, that was a federation of national societies. So each national Red Cross or Red Crescent society was independent, but they came together with over 200 of these independent organizations to create a federation because they wanted to collaborate, because they had a larger vision for how they could do more globally by working together. So to me, it's quite clear that we're, although we don't use that word, this is a federation because we're a group of entities, and we're coming together for a common cause because we believe that by working together, we can do more than each of us working alone can do. So this brings me to sort of one of the first points I really wanted to make, and this is the feedback I had from talking to a lot of people when I was first asked to stand for treasurer, that there is a lot of we-they attitude between sort of us on this side and those on that side, between the IMCs and other IMCs, between IMCs and ICMCI, between ICMCI and others. And it's really critically important, I believe, if we do have this common vision for where we want to go, is somehow we have to get past this we-they. And I must say, in the year that I've been here, I'm feeling much, much better about this. I think we've made huge progress. I've made it a point to attend every hub meeting and then every other formal meeting since my appointment in Johannesburg. And I'm very, very pleased with the spirit of collaboration and even hearing the collaboration in the room today. But I really want to reinforce that we need to step back to think about our strategy and how do all of us work together, and then figure out what do we do in IMCs that are going to help advance the cause, what must be delegated to ICMCI, and how do we fund those in terms of volunteer hours and cash resources, and then each get on with the job in terms of being accountable for what we've agreed to do. But it's going to be a bit tough. I just wanted to quickly, because of time, I'm not going to spend as much time talking about this model as I wanted to, but because of my career in not-for-profit and my experience in governance, including chairman of organizations like UNICEF Canada, I've learned that there is a maturation curve for not-for-profit organizations. It starts on the left-hand side with unmet needs and volunteer action. So this could be as simple as, in Canada, you see that your neighbor is old and not very strong, and there's a big snowstorm. So when you're out shoveling your sidewalk, you say, well, geez, that person is not going to be able to get out for groceries, so you shovel their walk for them. So in other words, you see a need and you meet it. That kind of then can grow into something like a group of people sitting around the kitchen table, identifying a need in their community and deciding that they're going to spend time and raise some money to satisfy that need. Children's hospitals in a lot of communities in different parts of the world started that way because there was no facility available for children that were sick in their community. So they raised money and they hired a nurse or a doctor to come to the community and eventually built a building for them. Up to the top right, as those needs are recognized in the community, you'll see civil service where the government, in the case of the hospitals, will take over and say, yes, this is an important need. we're going to put hospitals in communities, and we're going to charge a tax of all of the citizens because this is a commonly felt need, and we're going to put that in place. But there is this growth through there. We're currently at stage 2, where we're volunteer operated. So it's past the people sitting around the kitchen table because we have an organization. And it served us pretty well for 25 years, where groups of individuals would come together and they would make decisions, and then they would go away and do their thing, and then they'd come back together in another year. So the structure we had for that worked quite well. You'd have trustees that were appointed by the IMCs. Once a year they would come together and make those decisions, do some work, and then move along. We're now moving to stage 3, where we want to be volunteer directed and actually engage staff to do some work that will be directed by governance. So we want to start teasing apart this governance structure where we as volunteers can decide policy and delegate it to staff who can carry on the work. The issue with this curve is that each time you move from one stage to the next stage, there's a lot of angst in the organization. It's difficult. It's just hard work because the roles change. It's difficult to perceive. For instance, in my role as a treasurer, in the morning I might be working on a policy document I'm going to be sending to you. In the afternoon, I'm approving invoices for payment. So normally that would be done by a volunteer governor, like a director, and the approving invoices would be done by a staff person. But here, I'm wearing my governance hat in the morning, and I'm wearing my staff support hat in the afternoon. So getting that clear, and especially in working with now our full-time executive director, becomes really important. So, I say all of that to say this, that are we serious about wanting to work together to improve the quality and the nature of the profession of management consulting globally? Because this is the year that the rubber is hitting the road. This is the year where we've decided that we are going to be able to fund ourselves. As your treasurer, I do need to watch that cash flow carefully. If it looks like we're not going to be able to fund the position, then that to me would be a very, very negative step for us to be able to move forward in any way. So I've got some big questions for you, which are in the Treasurer's report. So those were sent out to you in advance, and I'll refer to them tomorrow. But the first one is, are we budgeting correctly, particularly in the balance of membership fees and external revenue generation for our Secretariat activities? So Tim, I think it was earlier this morning, said that best practices now are that membership fees will cover your core costs, and revenue generation from external sources will cover your development and growth costs. So as you saw in that graph a while ago, we're in fact going to be covering our core costs about 50-50 from membership fees and revenue generation. So we need to ask ourselves the question, how do we want to manage this going forward? The second one, is the allocation formula correct? I've had feedback over the last year from a number of you, and some of you that aren't in this room, that there's a disproportionate weight on countries that do not have strong economies or that are in emerging markets, so that the percentage of their annual budget that goes towards the ICMCI membership is much larger than the percentage of budget of some other IMCs that are doing that work. Now, I don't want to open these kinds of cans of worms without needing to, but I think, this is the time for us to think about it. Do we have the right model for that? Should we enter into discussion? I'm not asking for recommendations or resolutions on any of these things by tomorrow, but I am asking you to think about these things and see, should we start a process leading up to Amsterdam? I'm sorry, Nordvac, leading up to Nordvac, where we would bring resolutions forward in terms of how we would do that. The third one is whether we, as we try to go into things like corporate sustaining membership, do we need to start having an external audit of our books? That is an expense, but on the other hand, if we're going to be raising money, especially significant portions of our revenue externally, perhaps we need to be thinking about that. And then sort of the biggest question of all, can we raise the money we need without unduly burdening IMC's own budget? So of course, the easiest way for the finance committee would be for all of you to say, okay, let's just double our membership fees, we'll be fine, and we'll all raise the money. But I know that's not going to be the answer. So the question is, how do we find that right balance between raising funds externally? I love the whole concept of the corporate sustaining member, because it is a way for IMCs to create some revenue. It's a way for ICMCI to fund some of its operations as well. But balance is everything. We really do need to be aware of that. I'm probably just a little outside my range here. All else fails, press the space bar. So what I was going to do is walk through the revenue sources. So I'm not going to spend as much time on this as I might have, because we are out of time, and I know we have a very packed agenda. But just so to give you the headlines, I'm not even going to talk about each of the slides, but we are talking about our corporate members. We've had a workshop on that this morning already. The CMC Global Institute, it's not driven from a perspective of revenue generation, but it can generate some revenue. I have a separate report on that this afternoon. The CMC firm, you heard a report on that this morning. The international conference, we're structuring that and trying to leverage that, really sharing of knowledge to ourselves and outside. The International Management Consulting Specialty, had lots of very interesting feedback about that, but I'll be presenting that separately this afternoon as well, and we can talk about that more. The ICMC brokered projects, quite often because we're located at the center, there is information we have available around contracts and so on. Perhaps we could leverage that more in a way that makes sense. An awards assessment process for national awards, and other ideas. So any and all of you, I'm sure, have some ideas. Your finance committee is working very hard on this. We have very senior people on it. Soren is on the finance committee. SAC is on the finance committee. Oliver from US is on the finance committee. We have another Canadian, Randy. Rima is always at our meetings. So this is receiving, and XCOM is briefed regularly on our work. So it is a very high priority for us. So that is what I wanted to say to you. I wanted to set a bit of context before I give you my formal treasurer's report tomorrow morning, and it helps to set the context as well for some of our discussions today. We don't have time to, unfortunately, talk about this right now, but I am around over coffee, and all members of XCOM are around over lunch this afternoon, this evening, and so on, and we can come back to this tomorrow. Okay? Thank you very much for your time.